Good afternoon. I hope you had a nice lunch. And we're starting with our next panel, Post-Secondary Pathways in Technology Careers. And moderating this is my colleague, Kaustav Mitra. I'm sure all of you know Kaustav. Not only is he a great colleague to work with, but he's built many, many partnerships for the foundation and worked with many of you. So delighted to have him here moderate. And he, next to him is Nigamanth Sridhar, who's a professor at Cleveland State University. We also have Ton-Quinlivan. She basically manages all of California community colleges, which is 113 community colleges and a $900 million budget, so has a huge job. And then lastly, we have Jeff Casimir, and he's the executive director of the Turing School, and he's taught lots and lots of kids how to code, and also taken kids that have no experience to actually a professional software career. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Lauren. Before we dive into the session, thank you all for coming. A couple of quick housekeeping details, which I thought I'd throw out wearing my host hat. So one is, I do hope all of you are planning to come for the dinner tonight. I had a few conversations which had me concerned because people said, we don't really want to see a circus. So I was clarifying, Two-Bit Circus is an amazing organization. They're based in LA. They're basically Disney Imagineering. Has anyone here seen the OK Go videos? Yeah? So Two-Bit Circus designed those sets. And they do these amazing technology spectacles. It's going to be downstairs here at 8 o'clock, so you have 2.5 hours of breathing room, but I do hope all of you will come back. Second, I did want to clarify for people, your badges, and this came up a few times, by the way, gets you into all the areas of the conference. So if you want to go upstairs, I'd encourage you to visit the technology showcase upstairs. There's some very cool stuff if you want to sit in one of the keynotes. We had Meg Whitman earlier today. We had the governor of Indiana earlier today. And I know there's some amazing ones planned tomorrow as well, so do join for those. In particular, there's a really cool one at 8 in the morning with Amy Mullins, who is, from what I understand, one of the most highly viewed TED Talks ever. She is a supermodel athlete who happens to also be a paraplegic. And has some amazing stories to share. So do go anywhere you want to. Don't have to think about that we're keeping you contained in this area. We can hang out with the for-profit boys too. And so just wanted to throw out that quick housekeeping detail. And also I do hope, especially for those of you who are introverts, do stop by the design thinking session, which is Empathy in Action at 4:30, which is meant to be a networking session for introverts. And John Kemble, who's been facilitating these sessions, is actually one of the co-founders of the D School at Stanford. So he is about as good as it comes when it comes to design thinking. He and his colleagues have the ones who have built out the whole framework for it, so do take advantage of that. But with that, I'll put my hat back on, and not to keep these amazing panelists waiting. What triggered the design of this panel was really the thought of, there's a lot of conversations that we have around what do we teach kids in school? What are we doing in K-12? And there's been amazing progress with the new CS Principles exam, with a lot of stuff happening at elementary school levels. And then we've got employers. Infosys recently announced that they're going to hire 10,000 people here in the next 5 years. And Infosys is just one of dozens and dozens of companies this size. So there's this huge demand coming for young people at the other end, and we don't spend a lot of time talking about what happens in between these two, right? So what happens when someone graduates 12th grade and to the time that they actually end up getting hired by someone, and there seems to be some sort of a default assumption that it gets figured out. They'll go to college and they'll somehow get a degree, and miraculously they'll get a job at the end of it. And so this panel was really carefully constructed because we wanted to bring some experts in who present three very different points of view. Jeff, of course, runs the Turing School, which is an amazing school. It's a coding school, and I'm sure we'll hear more about the kinds of things that he does. And that's really kind of what I'd call, and pardon me if I misstated, Jeff, but more kind of an informal track, saying, okay, well, you've decided you're not going to college, you're not going to community college, then here's an opportunity to to get some doors open for yourself. And Van has been doing amazing work leading workforce development for California community colleges, which, if I'm not mistaken, Van is one of the largest college systems in the country. Is it the largest? It's the largest. So, of course, she graduates a very large number of students, and at the foundation we've always felt that we need more engagement with community colleges because it offers a very viable path at a time when college tuitions are getting cost prohibitive for a lot of young people. And then we have Nigamanth, who has been doing amazing work as CS faculty over at Cleveland State, and we wanted to learn more about kind of how our four-year college is thinking about preparing for this. So with that, I'll actually, Nigamanth, I might put you on the spot first and throw out the question is, one thing that we've seen is the part that I mentioned, that colleges are getting very, very expensive for young people. At the same time, it does seem to be that there just isn't enough capacity to graduate the number of kids who the workforce is asking for at the other end. So can you share a little bit maybe about what is happening at Cleveland State and other schools to kind of meet this demand?
Sure. Thanks, Kaustav. Thanks for that introduction. So the post-secondary world. So let me just back up a little bit and talk about my own background for just a minute, and then come back and put this in context. So for the first 10 years of my career as a faculty member, I was one of those core CS people, right? So working in quote unquote traditional computer science research and teaching upper division courses and graduate courses. And in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been working largely in the in lower division college courses and the high school realm. And I've noticed and I've learned that there's just a significant quote unquote motivation gap between these two things. I mean, the amount of excitement and motivation that we're focusing on in K-12 is largely absent at the college level, right? I mean, at the college level, it's seen as saying, okay, you're over the hump, you're in a computer science major. Now it's just, you take a bunch of courses, you graduate, and then you go into the workforce, right? So this thing about saying, let's focus on the excitement and get people interested and excited about being in computer science seems to die off. And the reason I'm saying that is that so again, like I said, I taught a large number of upper division courses, and now I'm teaching these freshman courses. And in freshman years, I see more women and people of color and so on in the classes who kind of disappear and evaporate by the time you get to the upper division, right? So I think that first of all, the excitement factor is important. It is important to keep that up during somebody's college career as well, right? Now, coming back to this question of what are colleges doing to actually, keep up with this, with these numbers, right? So I was just before I walked in here, I was talking to Dan, and he was talking about his Berkeley experience, and which I'll relay as well. Berkeley now has 1,700 students in their CS1 class, right? The largest, so they don't have a room that anywhere on the campus that can fit that number of students, right? So they're in the main auditorium with these classes and so on, right? So the point is, and then we were talking earlier today, if you look at Stanford, for example, 10% of their students are computer science students. 2% of their faculty are computer science faculty, right? So there's this larger and larger gap that's widening between the number of students coming into computer science programs and faculty that are teaching these classes, right? So one immediate reaction that mostly department chairs have is, well, I have large enrollment, let's go hire more tenure track faculty, right? But we all understand that that's perhaps not the best way to fix that problem, because what if 10 years from now, AI comes along and just takes out the software development function as a job function? Then what, right? Now you have a whole bunch of tenure track faculty that aren't teaching anybody else in the classroom. So that's, I'm sort of going all over the place, and the point is to plant a number of thoughts in people's heads so we can come back and talk about these things.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Nigamanth. And that actually was a perfect segue for the question I was going to ask you, Van, which is the instinctive feeling that we have is that community colleges are potentially a very viable place to be looking at a solution for this, just given the scale that you have and the infrastructure that you have. And I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts were as far as community colleges addressing this potential education opportunity gap.
So the community colleges have become much more front and center over the last few years, thanks to the last administration, but also a recognition, especially in our state, that not only do we need to have the competitive workforce, but we need ways to advance social mobility. And 60% of our students have free tuition. So it's very affordable and accessible. And if you're a minority, the likelihood is if you enter post-secondary education at all, you're likely going to step first on the community college campus. So part of it is the art and the science is to figure out how do you establish these pathways from community college, right? So from K-12 to community college into the workforce, or to the community college and then into the four-year programs. Because if you don't start that pathway without this link, then the students are not going to know how to get there. Now, to your point, which is how do you get excitement amongst these institutions for this current wave and whatever the need is in the labor market. Over the last 5 years, we've been doing a set of strategies under the banner of doing what matters for jobs and economy. Doing what matters for jobs and economy is really call for our colleges to step in and close the skills gap. And it takes a lot to do that, but let me just sort of roll it forward. By getting the alignment of the monies, the metrics, and the data underlying our system, what we've been able to uncover through experimentation is that we could actually take advantage of our scale. Now, with 113 colleges and 2.1 million students, if we're able to take advantage of our scale, then we could step into these skill void a lot better. And again, these are all independent colleges. They have their independent board of trustees. So it's not a centralized system, right? So it's a system of influence and kind of coalition of the willing. So let me just share with you what we've been able to learn. We decided to walk away from single college pilots, which had been the pattern of the past, because we found we couldn't replicate single college experiments. We tried a test just because it was so problematic. We said, you always hear about employers complaining about soft skills, right? Day one, employability skills, right? Communication, collaboration, etc. I got tired of sitting at advisories, and it didn't matter whether they're community colleges or sitting on the employer side or on the four-year system. They're always complaining about it. So we finally said, this is such an acute problem. Can 10 colleges come together and create a solution? So 10 colleges did come together, and they created this new world of work curriculum, and employers can badge when they see evidence of the skills, and the faculty can badge when they see evidence of the skills. And then now we have 22 colleges that have adopted it. So then we discovered, there's this sort of technology adoption curve in our system. It goes from 10 to 30 to 60 and then to 113. So that's how we're going to ride our technology adoption curve. So we did the same with the maker movement, and Carol Pepper-Kittredge is sitting in front of me. She leads that for us. So we put out a challenge grant and said, can a network of colleges connect into the maker movement, because we need creative economy skill, and it's not going to come from our traditional classroom. And so through that process, we now have 28 community colleges. 15 already have maker spaces, and then the others are all doing business plans in order to get into the maker space. So now, in this, I think what we have to do is figure out how to do it at scale, because the issue is so big. How do we take advantage of scale and multiple institutions and do collective effort?
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Vaughn. And actually, there's a whole bunch of questions that opens up, which I'd love to come back to you with, if time permitting, when Lauren shows us the card. But Jeff, I guess you represent a very interesting part of this entire ecosystem, and which is kind of the last 10-year phenomenon of coding schools. I guess 10 years when it really started becoming popular. And of course, you started Turing, and you're now a nonprofit, if I understand it correctly. Yes.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, there's demand for it, because you're kind of being drawn in because there's a number of kids who want to come to you and go to your programs. How do you see that fitting in here as part of the overall solution for creating talent or bring to the table talent who can then be employed?
Yeah, I think the very first motion in coding schools, boot camps, whatever you want to call it, is really only 4 years old at this point. So it's still early in the growing cycle to really see. But as far as like fitting into the puzzle, I have a computer science degree, and I don't find computer science that interesting. And if somebody asked me if they're thinking about studying computer science, I would tell them, if you think it's an interesting hobby, then like go for it. But I'm not that. I see programming as a tool for empowering economic mobility, and that's what we set out to do, is like workforce building, not technology building. And so that has a lot, that's really like influenced at every level the design of the program and how we recruit students and how we graduate students and so forth. So now this year we'll graduate 250 professional software developers and like roll that forward. And so I think a lot of people don't publish numbers about these things, but I think that makes us one of the largest supplies of job-ready software developers in the country or the world. So coming back to the early days of, like, I'm so frustrated looking back on my traditional education, as exactly what you said. Like, we didn't learn how to work in teams. We didn't learn how, modern, effective processes for building software. We learned some obscure languages, and we learned like lots of neat things. And I spent a lot of hours by myself in underground computer labs, and I learned a ton, but it did not prepare me for a job. And I went to college to get a job. And I think a lot of people go to college to get jobs. And I think what you see, the idea of boot camps are trying to address, is the fundamental challenge to me about higher ed, or how we've structured higher ed, is this tension between academic inquiry and exploration and job skill prep. And the majority of our institutions, the majority of the programs within those, try and do both and end up doing neither. And I hope that if we can build like a national culture around job skill training, that we can say, hey, higher ed is for going and studying things that are interesting. And like, if you think it's linked lists, then go study linked lists. And if you think it's Greek mythology, go study Greek mythology. And then when you're done, then we'll build some skills for a job, whether it's in programming or it's in machinery or whatever job you're gonna have.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jeff. I'm going to come back to you, Nigamanth, for a quick question, and it's related, so bear with me. And that is, we're talking about this as a scale problem. I think there's a number that gets quoted every 3 months. I don't know, what is it, a shortfall of 1 million people, there'll be 1 million open jobs by 2020, and in the computing profession. As wearing two hats, as a technologist yourself, as well as someone who's interested in this problem, do you think there are interesting opportunities with technology itself being part of the solution, whether by way of MOOCs or other ways, or alternative ways of learning, which may help you literally bring a lot more prospective students through this pipeline, moving away from the strict idea of college you go to, you sit in the classroom and you take notes and you go back and do your homework. So enabling different ways of learning.
Sure. So that number, the million number, gets quoted. I have an even more stark number, and that's from where I am at, which is Northeast Ohio in Cleveland, which is not necessarily a technology hub. There's more manufacturing jobs than there are tech jobs. But in Northeast Ohio, there's something like 42,000 IT jobs that are open. And if you look at the pipeline and how many students actually graduate and so on, all the 4-year colleges and the 2-year colleges put together graduate about 300 to 400 a year, right? So there's that 2 orders of magnitude difference in the supply and the demand, right? So there's that problem right there, right? Coming to this thing about how do you use technology as a way of managing the scale problem. I think so. The notion of MOOCs as a way of replacing courses is ill-advised, right? I mean that was an experiment that we tried as a community, and I think we've learned that it's not a replacement, but it's a nice thing that sits next to it, right? So a lot of the technologies that were developed in order to create those MOOCs. For example, squarely in computer science, auto-grading of assignments, right? Auto-grading of assignments was an essential technology without which you couldn't have put together a MOOC on AI or programming or whatever else, right? But now, when you have these large classes, you can now use those technologies to take time that a faculty member would have otherwise used in grading, and you can now use that as face time, right? So there's a replacement of how faculty time and teaching assistant time gets used in various ways. So that's really the idea of the technology. And then the other conversation that seems to be going on nationwide around the whole notion of competency-based education or mastery-based education. That's another thing about saying, I don't necessarily have to be in class for a 4.5-month semester to learn the material that you're teaching me if I can demonstrate competency in, let's say, 5 weeks, right? So that idea of competency-based education is also picking up. We want to be careful about putting all of our eggs in that basket and saying let's go do this and replace college education, because again I'm willing to bet that if we tried that approach as saying let's just replace college with competency based, we're going to find out that experiment will fail as well, right? But if we treat it as a way of saying we can supplement what happens in the classroom, what happens in a regular traditional 4-year setting with these kinds of things, that could be a good a good way to think about it. And I just want to say one thing in sort of in response to what Jeff said earlier about job preparation versus college. You're exactly right. I mean you're exactly right, Jeff, in that lots of people look at a 4-year college as saying that's what's going to prepare me for a job. And that mostly comes from the fact that when an employer is going out and looking for people, they're saying, I want people with a 4-year degree, right? I mean, it's a paradox that we're sitting in where companies come in and say, I want people with a 4-year degree, but I also want somebody that has these current skills, right? So it becomes a catch-22, and I think as an industry and as a field, we need to keep having this conversation to resolve this thing as well.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Nigamanth. Sorry, Jeff, did you have something to add to that?
I was just going to say, it's faded a little bit, but maybe 2 years ago in kind of the boot camp space, there was a lot of talk about like, we're disrupting higher education. College is stupid. No one should ever go to college. And I would enjoy asking people like, oh, you didn't go to college? And they say, oh, I went to Stanford. Like, oh, it's easy to tell other people not to go to college when you have that like sweet degree in your back pocket.
Yeah, it's a great point. And actually, I'm going to build right on what Nigamanth said, and the question to you, Vaughn, and that is, and I know you and I have spoken about it separately, which is there is this kind of a mismatch where you have employers saying, well, we want kids with 4-year degrees, and these are our ideal candidates. And I know traditionally a lot of community colleges, of course, you have 2-year programs, and then there's kind of a cliff saying, okay, well, either you move into a traditional 4-year program somewhere else. Do you think there is a path which can be navigated through this, whereas either doing better expectation setting for employers, saying, look, you're asking for the wrong things, or is it, do you think, more on the community college side, saying, okay, well, do we need to think of a way that we can offer 4-year degrees, or what is your thinking about this whole topic as far as what kind of certification someone is getting after going through a community college?
So one observation is that our country hasn't been very good at managing supply and demand of talent. I mean, if you look back at it, right, we had a shortage of engineers, and then we went all the way across the ocean to import engineers into Silicon Valley, right? And then we had a shortage of nurses. How do I know? I mean, when I was having my first child at Stanford Hospital, the nurse that was taking care of me was from the Philippines, right? Because they couldn't get enough nurses. So we swing in these wide directions because we can't calibrate very well. And so for this particular space, if you're going to hire 10,000 and you're not the only organization, right? How do we
By the way, I have a lot of people for you to hire.
Oh, okay. We should talk.
we need to get the signaling better. And part of that, even when I was on the private sector side, it wasn't that the institutions can build the program. The employers need to stand with those programs. And when the employers stand with those programs, the students make it through better. Right? So they'll go to the programs and they'll make it through. And then the hard work that all of us have to do is get the sequence down so that it's the line of sight for students to move through is not convoluted. It's clear. There's a program where the Cal State University of Monterey plus Hartnell College, which is a community college, and their high school, they came together, one faculty champion in each level, and they totally turned and redesigned their program so that they could get minority students through to computer science bachelor in 3 years. However, it started in high school by actually assessing students not on their math science sequence, it was actually on their persistence. So they screened students on persistence, and that's how they built the cohort to then start moving through. But there was no point where any institution handed off the students to get lost in the registration process. These students were truly seamlessly, just pre-registered and carried through both these, the community college and the 4-year system. And that's how they were able to do that. And the internship with employers were embedded, so the experiential learning was all embedded so that they would get internships and jobs. So it's all design, it's basically doing design thinking and redesigning how students would actually move through.
Brilliant.
Very complicated, though.
Great, thanks. And Jeff, I have a question for you, which is, it's a bit of a loaded question, so feel free to take it how you will. There was, I don't know if you saw this article recently, I think it was Atlantic, or was it Wired, talking about, the coding as the next blue-collar job.
Yeah.
Right? I forget where it was, but I'm sure you saw it, everybody saw it.
Yeah.
And is there a concern at all, and I get worried, I speak with a lot of organizations, and I get worried when I speak with amazing programs with a lot of heart, and they'll tell us we're running a boot camp and we're teaching the kids HTML, or we're teaching them CSS. And at that point, I pause a little bit, and I worry about, is there any thinking around that for a lot of programs, the students who are going through them, they're being set up to a path where, yes, they may even be able to get entry-level jobs, but pathways to advance in them might be limited because of a lack of either larger contextual knowledge, a deeper understanding of computer science. Is that something which, and I know you approach Turing very differently, but does that factor into thinking? Is the idea, let's get someone into a job and they'll figure it out afterwards? And what would your reaction be to that?
Yeah, I think the kind of accelerated training model needs to be thought of in the same way as college as a model, right? And to say, like, one college degree is different than another, that's very obvious to us, right? That a journalism degree and a political science degree and a computer science degree are going to have very different job possibilities and trajectories and so forth. And accelerated training, I think, is just the same problem, right? Where someone can offer a 8-week program where you're learning HTML and CSS, and like you are the journalist of computer science, right? Like there are a lot of you, there aren't that many jobs. It's really neat what you can do if you find the right one. At the same time, you can have deeper programs that prepare people for a larger swath of jobs. So it is both true and untrue to worry about what happens when they enter the industry. There definitely are jobs that can become like not dead-end jobs, but they're limited in their growth potential. What we've seen, coming back to this idea of like, to me, the soft skills or the professional skills, as we like to call them, are the whole thing. And what's interesting when you train someone who, our median age is about 26. So most people have had a first mini career or sequence of jobs, and they come in and they have experience. Maybe it was managing a warehouse, being a bartender, et cetera. When they layer on the technical skills on top of that and then get into a job, they're able to apply those people skills that so many of my people, computer science people, did not develop in, let's say, high school or college or anywhere else. And what they find is that when they get out into the workforce, they're promoted at these nearly absurd rates, where we see graduates who are out 2 years, over 50% of them are either team leads, directors, and in some cases VPs of things. And I'm like, how can you be a VP? You just got here. But it's the reality, I think, is that they go into teams where they're amongst other individual contributors. They know how to work with the team and they're effective at their job. And then the other people who are doing software development, who want to be doing software development, say to them like, you're cool, be our boss. And then they're like, okay, I guess, like if there's a promotion, I'll take it because I'm nervous about my programming skills and whatnot. And they just march up the ladder really quickly. And the part that's incredibly encouraging and like heartwarming about it is to then see them get into positions where they're hiring and then come back and hire the next generation of grads.
Right. That's I think it's a fascinating viewpoint, and it's not one which would immediately be apparent when you, just like you mentioned, saying that, okay, it makes sense. It's exactly what Vaughn said. There's this whole world of soft skills which are critical to be successful in the workplace.
I believe that like learning, when we've heard a couple times today about learning computer science and getting into tech, about learning how to learn, and I always feel a little bit uncomfortable with that. Like I really think about it as learning how to attack and iterate on problems, and that's actually much more actionable. Like just learning to learn is great for your self-edification, but that doesn't like drive progress and doesn't help other people be better at their job. Yeah. But learning how to analyze a problem, how to measure results, how to correct course, and how to work with and lead a team, that's useful whether you're actually writing binary search trees or you're designing products or you're running teams.
Brilliant. I see Lauren has given me the 1 minute sign, so just one super quick question, if you could all do a really brief answer, and I can see a bunch of people here who I'd love to hear from. Sean's right there, Sergio and Devin and Wayne, and so many people here I'm sure would love to jump in. Nigamanth, to put you on the spot, one thing you think that we could do better to address this potential mismatch that we're talking about?
So I think it's extremely important for universities and companies to talk to each other more often, right? And to understand and level set who can do what, right? I mean, when a company comes in and says, I need students who are graduating that know this particular technology. Well, that doesn't happen from a 4-year school. It's just it's a different kind of machine. But at the same time, from a 4-year college professor perspective, it is also important for curriculum developers to figure out this is what people are hiring for, right? So how do we prepare these students to actually be ready to go into the workforce, right? So that level setting has to happen, and it can only happen by conversation.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Nigamanth. Vaughn, very briefly, what do you think we could be doing better?
The big gateway right now, the big bottleneck, both in the K-12 and the higher ed, is the instructional workforce. I think we need to work together, industry and the education, to unbottleneck that. And it may come in the form of training our trainers, or it could be loaning trainers. But I think there's a range of solutions, but if we don't work together, we're not going to crack the code on this problem.
Brilliant. Jeff?
I believe that the majority of software developers and software and technology companies don't know what it takes to be successful or why they're successful. So when you're asked to write a job description, you vomit out a bullet list of technologies you happen to use at this moment, put an arbitrary time stamp of 5, 8, 40 years experience, something like that. And it actually means next to nothing, right? By the time that person is hired and onboarded, the list of technologies will have likely changed and so forth. And that is why I think the majority of companies are so scared and ineffective at hiring new people, right? Because that's the kind of like hidden secret in all these numbers is so many hundreds of thousands of open jobs, but there are applicants applying for those jobs that are not hired, right? And it's not because they don't know what they're doing. It is primarily because companies don't know how to onboard, on-ramp, and train people. So we hope for someone else to do it, thereby, and then we can be their second job or their third job down the line. And so it's like this standoff between all these willing, trained people and companies that want people with 5 years experience and being unwilling and really not understanding how to take someone and make them highly effective in the matter of months or their first couple of years of the job.
Great. Thanks so much, folks. Would love to, sorry, is it not? Oh, yes. Would love to open it up to the audience for questions. I can imagine so many coming up here. Stephanie, would you like to go first?
Yeah.
If you could just introduce yourself and your organization before you start, please.
Hi, Stephanie Wartell-London from the New York Academy of Sciences. We're an Infosys Foundation USA grantee. We run the Next Scholars program, which connects undergraduate women in the United States that are majoring or minoring in CS with a one-to-one relatable female mentor. So my question is, it seems the missing link here is the availability of internship-like experiences for undergraduate level students and even high school level students to get their feet wet and start to understand a little bit more about what success looks like, what soft skills are they really going to need. And I have been researching, looking for these kinds of experiences to supply them to the 300 young women in my program, and it seems that they're not readily advertised. So I'm just wondering, to what extent are universities and tech organizations collaborating to create these kinds of early career experiences? And if you know that they are, where can I look to find those so I can send them to my students?
Brilliant. Would you like to take a step?
So these things, co-op and internship opportunities for college students is really where it's at. I mean, our computer science program is in an engineering college, and engineering programs typically have a better solution than computer science programs do in terms of actually doing this better, right? So our engineering internship and co-op programs are incredibly robust, and so CS programs tend to piggyback on those successes and are able to do that. And then we've also invested in the last 4 or 5 years time in working with companies in saying, okay, you can take students to go and do an internship or a co-op in your company, but an even better experience for you would be to come to us and work with students on their senior projects. I mean, every student does a senior project, so you work with teams of students in actually defining problems and then helping them do curricular work, right? So both of these experiences, the co-op experience where somebody goes out into an actual office environment and works there, as well as the opportunity to work on research-like problems that are defined by industry. Both of those are incredibly useful for at least our graduates. When it's hard to go on commencement day and find somebody that doesn't have a job, where we graduate students, right? And I think in large measure it is because of those soft skills that they learn outside of the classroom. There is no way that any four-year college is going to claim that they can teach their students soft skills. That doesn't occur, right? Because those skills are not learned in a classroom setting. Those skills are learned in an experiential setting, right? Like you just said, and what you're talking about as an add-on, right? So that sort of thing is extremely critical.
Yeah, I just think it's incredibly important, and so it's like valuable work to put in. I think when you look at other industries, so I have a theory that the like Achilles heel of the technology industry is that we think we're smarter than everyone. And when you look at other industries like law, for instance, the companies, like the best firms, put a tremendous amount of energy and time into building intern programs, recruiting interns, and treating those interns like over the top, excessively comfortably during their time because they want to recruit the best people. And I think often in tech we treat internships and apprenticeships as like charitable enterprises, right? Of like, oh, this is a thing we should do because it's good for people. And that's true, but I think companies are slowly coming to learn that those are actually very high leverage relationships, right? When you can bring in someone at a junior level salary and pay them $80K and they do equivalent work to somebody who's getting paid $120K, like you should do more of that.
Right.
And so companies are like slowly making progress on it. But they're generally like risk averse, I think is the unfortunate part.
Great, thanks so much, Jeff. How are we in time, Lauren? Okay, great. Sean, did you have a question? Yeah. If you could just introduce yourself and organization, please.
Sure. Hi, my name's Sean Arian. I run something called the Center for Innovation and Technology at the LA Area Chamber of Commerce. And we act as a tech intermediary for a lot of our workforce system and community colleges in the Los Angeles area, where we provide a number of work-based learning opportunities, everything from classroom visits to internships at tech companies. My question is, I really like the content of this panel in that I think you guys are really breaking down this, I think something that I think we all know intuitively, but you guys are really articulating the difference between, you know, what college or academic institutions do and can teach, and then the things that are necessary to pick up outside the classroom. And I think the two that I've heard from the panel more than anything have been around sort of the in-person experiences, or the sort of experiential learning that you get from working with people in the industry. And second is the ability to stay on top of the newest skill sets that you need to work with companies. And both of those seem to me, the issue I wanted to bring up is one of equity. I wanted to ask a question, is both of those seem to go in large proportion to people either who are high income, or who can go somewhere like General Assembly and pay $15,000 for a 3-month program.
Don't go to General Assembly.
To get the latest program, or
We'll edit that part out.
or to
Unless they
internships.
sponsored. If they sponsored, definitely go there.
Then go. Or the experiential things go. You typically disproportionately go to people who are at elite institutions. So both of those mean I think you have a huge equity problem where people who are low income or who traditionally are not well represented in the tech industry don't get those opportunities and therefore don't get the jobs. What I think are your institutions or institutions like yours, what can we do about that problem?
Brilliant. So the question's about one of equity, and where does that fit into this larger conversation? Could I go to you with that, Van?
So absolutely, and as I mentioned, that's why the community colleges have come front and center, because of its affordability, but also its ubiquity. And especially in industries like healthcare, where if you don't have the right credential, you can't even get the interview, right? So these are very high stakes kind of qualifications that you have to have in order to enter these fields. I think decoding the pathway is really important. There's all these careers that are brand new, that have names, that if you're coming from maybe an underserved community, you may be more familiar with the nurses and the doctors and the teachers and the social worker and the athletes than the medical informatics or what's a data scientist? There's so many new occupations that it's very unfamiliar socially. So what we have to do is we have to decode. Part of it is we have to do early career exploration, early and often early, like preferably middle school into the high school. And you're doing a lot of work for us with community colleges. We're going to roll out a whole campaign. We created a mobile app where we actually demystify what's the earning power of every certificate, every degree that you could get through our institutions, but also at 4-year. And we're taking it out into communities, especially those less familiar with these educational pathway, to begin early career exploration. Because if you begin to understand what your full range of options, we're hoping we get more students to be able to make it across from secondary to post-secondary. And then to have some sticking power. Our institutions often say, well, start with the ed planning. But now I think the understanding is you need to start with the career planning. When people understand what careers they want, they see, feel it, whether they shadow or other ways, then they want to stay on course. Otherwise, it's very abstract.
So very briefly, I mean, I'm going to, just challenge a little bit about saying, under-resourced people don't get these opportunities. So I'm at a small regional public institution. 72% of our students are Pell eligible. 50% of our students are max Pell eligible, right? So so it's not true that you can't do these kinds of things in those kinds of regions. What has worked incredibly well for us is leveraging the companies around us, because companies will actually put money into this, right? So in our region, we run. So we work with another nonprofit, actually, Lisa's in the other room back here. A tech core runs coding camps for middle school and high school students, right? I'm just giving you this as an example. So this summer alone, I think we have 17 or 18 camps that are all sponsored by companies. Last year we had 6. This year we have 18. Right? These are companies coming up and putting up thousands of dollars so that these camps can be offered for free to children that can come in and do these kinds of programs. Right? So there's it's a matter of asking the right people. But you're exactly right in finding out where the problem is.
Okay. We still got 5 minutes, Lauren? Okay, so Jeff, super quick, and I'd like to get one more question in.
Yeah.
So let's...
I'm not super quick, but I'll try and pretend.
We'll turn the mic on.
Our mission as an organization is to unlock human potential by training a diverse, inclusive student body to succeed in high-fulfillment technical careers. So I think there is no more important mission to attack in technology than to broaden the community that is included. We've tried to follow the model, I think, laid out well by Tesla, which is to offer a product at an absurdly high price and allow your initial consumers of privilege to build the market and the economies of scale such that you can then offer economical options behind it. And so we have tuition that's significant and now have tools and scholarships where not everyone, but most anyone can afford to come to our school.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jeff. I know, Nikki, you had a question. We'll try to get it super quick. We're down to our last 3 minutes.
So I'm Nikki Nafta. I'm the CEO of a company called Zulama, and we're actually doing what you're talking about with high school kids, where we're teaching game design and basically lots of different languages and trying to teach the thinkers, not just like what language you know. But we have a huge problem because we see a lot of traction in career and tech ed programs, but the funding for career and tech ed programs is reliant on students being able to earn a certificate, which is like Unity or 3ds Max. It is not anything that reflects what you guys are looking for. So how do you resolve that?
Perfect. I'll go to Jeff for this point. Would you like to take a stab at that?
Certification, I hate it. It's an understandable problem. I don't think the ideas of badging and micro-badging and that kind of thing, I don't think that's going anywhere. I think it's a huge distraction and unknown solution. Sorry. I have no solution other than to say, like, programming skills are easy to demonstrate, and so that's the reason there aren't good certifications, is because good engineers can show their skills in a matter of minutes, and the letters on a page aren't going to prove it.
Great, thanks so much. Lauren, how are we on time? Actually, I know Neil had a question out here first. So, are you good? Okay. Patty? Okay, Patty.
Okay, so I'm Patty from the University of Puerto Rico. So I started in tech, going through a boot camp, and then started teaching for a boot camp, and then I went to graduate school. And when I went to graduate school, I suddenly realized, wow, computer science is much more creative and much more like analytical, and there were all these skills that I hadn't learned just by programming. And now that I'm at Puerto Rico doesn't have a graduate program, so they don't see this. And so I guess I'm asking the question about equity because these are all great pathways, but I think where we're really lacking equity is not so much in the coding, because we have students that we can send to coding, but it's getting them to the PhD level. And so I was wondering if any of you were working on trying to get PhDs in computer science, or is that a goal? Because I think that I started on your track, and so I think there's lots of people that would love this career. And I think it's, I don't like programming, but I like the creativeness. I like building teams, and I like doing all that kind of stuff.
So here, I'll put out, maybe there's people in the audience that could help me with this. So we found out in our data that there's 20,000 students who left community colleges who did very well in their math sequence, but they never went on to a 4-year degree, and they never earned a community college degree either. We would love to call them back and say, hey, we identified you. You have the capability, kind of the headroom to do this. Come back and consider teaching in this or learning this pathway, or give them some options that are much more targeted based on the fact that they can and have the headroom to do that. So if any of you are out there interested in this kind of problem set, I'd love to talk to you.
Great, thanks so much, Vaughn. I believe we are out of time, Lauren. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for being an amazing panel. Please give a big round of applause.